dinosaurs. Well, that's fine, of course, I've got time to source my knowledge on the matter to you all. Dinosaurs are awesome! I'm not an expert, in truth I only saw some pictures in the book, but I had a good look, I didn't bother with the words, so it probably only took 3 minutes. But despite the bits I missed, I got the gist. Relax on my dinosaur facts, attack you like a fist.
Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom is directed by Juan Antonio Bayona. It stars Chris Pratt, Bryce Dallas Howard, James Cromwell, Rafe Spall, Ted Levine, as well as a bunch of token minorities that are used as nerdy types, but also kind of hot, because if there's one type of people that Hollywood really doesn't employ over minorities and women, it's ugly people. The first part of the film is something akin to the first part of The Lost World, Jurassic Park, where our main characters have to get dinosaurs off the island and back onto the mainland because their life is being threatened by a volcanic eruption that will destroy all life on the island. But it feels like nobody involved actually wanted to shoot that sequence, and it was just an excuse to get the dinosaurs to the mansion, to the second part of the film, and as such it results in one of the most boring, most awkwardly paced sequences I think I've ever seen in a movie theater. The second part of the film, on the other hand, is more akin to classic horror films, Universal horror movies, Hammer horror, even with little nods to Nosferatu. It really is in that gothic, single location horror vein. Unfortunately, the actual writing and execution is so dirt poor that while not as overtly bad as the first part of the film, it still makes for a pretty uninteresting and very unsatisfying movie. The film really horribly fails in 3 key areas. One would be the writing, the second the directing, and the third, which is sort of a result of the combination of the two, which is the pacing. I already mentioned that the first part of the film on the island is absolutely horribly paced, especially if you compare it to the first film in the franchise, Jurassic Park, which on the contrary is just a masterclass in how you put different sequences together and create a whole that is extremely well paced and tensed, and when to have downtime, when to have an action sequence, when to have a set piece. In this, they just throw things together. Our characters arrive on the island, and then they have to get to the tower, and next scene they're in the tower, then they have to locate Blue, next scene they find Blue, then Chris Pratt has to go after her, next scene Chris Pratt is with Blue. It is a film that is tailored to this ADHD mentality that really doesn't know when to breathe, when to have any downtime, when to develop its characters. It's just interested in going from action piece to CGI set piece to joke to explosion. There really isn't anything in this film other than a sort of cartoon-like sequence of events. On the directing front, I've seen quite a lot of people actually give some praise to J.A. Bayona's directing style and say that the movie's pretty. And sure, I guess the movie looks fine, but I think he really fails at injecting any sort of personality or a sense of suspense into the film. A good example of that would be the scene where they're trying to extract blood from the sleeping Tyrannosaurus Rex, which is actually an interesting idea, and it's the premise of something that could be very watchable, and in the hands of a better director and a better screenwriter could really be something special. Unfortunately, there's absolutely no tension within the scene. It's immediately undercut by some dumb jokes, and the way that Chris Pratt gets out of it is by essentially using his Dark Souls invincibility frames and jump rolling through the T-Rex's open mouth, which again puts us back in a place where this movie is no longer taking place in some sort of grounded reality, but rather it is a cartoon, and there are absolutely no consequences to anything. The film is absolutely chock full of visual cues and references to other films, and well, more specifically to Jurassic Park, the original movie. And Jurassic World was guilty of this as well, but at least with that movie, there was sort of this understanding between the director, the film, and the audience that we were taking part in this nostalgia fest, that there was this celebration of a collective imagery a collective reference point that we all had and that we all loved. In this one, they're just thrown out there with really not much regard. One of the worst examples would be when they recreate the Brachiosaurus scene from the original Jurassic Park, which has to be one of the most iconic scenes, obviously from the franchise, but of blockbuster cinema in the last couple of years for sure. In Jurassic Park, that sequence was memorable because obviously there was a sense of wonder. It was making it very clear to the characters, but also to the audience, that now through science and technology, we were about to enter a world of marvel, of wonder. We were at the beginning of an era where everything was possible. In this, obviously, it's hard to recreate the sense of wonder of the original film, but I'd argue this film doesn't even try, and it just throws it out there like a fart in the wind, and it just thought the imagery of the Brachiosaurus with the fallen Jurassic World theme park was a cool imagery. And finally, and this is maybe just a little tiny thing that maybe won't bother a lot of people, but I found it very telling, is that this film is the first film in the franchise, I believe, certainly compared to the older movies, the original movies. This is the first film that's shot in a CinemaScope 2.39:1, and Jurassic Park, and I believe The Lost World as well, were both shot in 1.85:1, which is a taller aspect ratio. It wasn't, full widescreen. And the scene that I just described with the Brachiosaurus is actually a pretty good indication of why that change in aspect ratio actually doesn't work. It's because these dinosaurs, they're so big, one of the important things that you want to communicate to the audience is the sense of scale. With a wider aspect ratio, obviously, you're getting less of that height and that sense of scale that you were getting with the 1.85:1. So, like I said, the Brachiosaurus scene, it's less impressive in CinemaScope than it is in regular 1.85:1. You look at the image from the poster, which is a pretty impressive image. I mean, it's very evocative. It tells you a lot. The way it works is because there's a really good sense of scale. You've got Chris Pratt in the foreground. That's this tiny, puny human. You've got the Tyrannosaurus Rex, which is the apex predator, the largest predator on planet Earth, that is dwarfing him, and then dwarfing both of them in the background is the most impenetrable, strongest, invincible force that exists in the world, which is nature and the exploding volcano. And the poster is actually a shot from the film, but because it's cropped into that wide scope, it really doesn't have that same evocative, impressive sense of scale, and it really doesn't imprint the imagination with any sense of wonder or marvel. Now, in terms of writing, this is probably where the movie's biggest failures are. First of all, when you create a franchise, when you have movies that exist within a universe of other movies, obviously they have to adhere to a certain set of principles, and there has to be a certain coherence between them. The original Jurassic Park was grounded in a certain amount of reality. That was what was so cool about it, is that it took these scientific advances and this real scientific research and these real ethical questions and brought them into a world where we could clone dinosaurs. But even if you can't say the movie is realistic, it was at least believable. And as more and more of these movies have been made, they've been becoming progressively more cartoonish and progressively more cartoony action-like, to the detriment of feeling like they exist in a grounded, real world. So that makes believing that these movies exist in the same universe really hard to swallow. And maybe one of the worst things that these new Jurassic World movies do is that they create this world where there are good and bad dinosaurs, which I think is fundamentally extremely stupid. In Jurassic Park, the T-Rex and the Velociraptors, they're not evil, they're not good either, they're just hunters, they're predators. They're out there to hunt their prey, feed, and reproduce. That's just what they're built as. Like any other animal, like any other species. but with Blue, that is this cute, cuddly little pet that's here to help out our heroes, and the T-Rex, which at this point is almost self-aware that it has to show up at the end and kill the bad dinosaur or kill the bad guy. And then these good dinosaurs are pitted against the bad dinosaurs, which are the genetic hybrids, so the Indominus Rex, the Indoraptor. And right there, from a writing standpoint, it's such a puerile and childlike observation of nature where there are cute, cuddly, good animals and bad, mean, ugly animals, which I feel is completely contrary to even what the first film stood for. Secondly, they really have to stop with this militarization of dinosaurs thing. I can't believe, first of all, that they used it once. Now they're still pushing that idea that they are genetically modifying dinosaurs so that they could be used in combat situations. That's like not something anybody in their right mind would ever think is intelligent. Like that is straight out of the Umbrella Corp. That is actually a lot of this film in the second half feels like with the mansion and the underground laboratory feels like it is a big budget adaptation of Resident Evil or Dino Crisis, and certainly not a Jurassic Park film. I mean, yes, we've used animals in the past before for warfare. This is explicitly said in the movie because they kind of realize how stupid it is, and they're like, well, we used to use horses. Well, yeah, we used to use horses, but A, horses aren't gonna, when you can't tame them, they're not gonna turn around and eat you. And B, as soon as we had the technology to create vehicles that were more efficient, we stopped using fucking horses, and now we live in a world with unmanned drones that can blast an entire village while the pilot is thousands of miles away in some basement in Kansas. The entire idea of militarized dinosaurs is idiotic and should never be discussed again. And finally, the characters are just brain dead and uninteresting. Just compare them to the original Jurassic Park, in which they are so charismatic and the words coming out of their mouths are actually interesting and well written. And that's not to say that those original characters didn't fall into archetypes, because they did, but they were there to illustrate and serve thematic purposes. The characters in this new film are only there to serve the plot and to advance the sequence of events so we can get from dinosaur action set piece to dinosaur action set piece to a good dinosaur showing up at the last minute to attack the bad, ugly dinosaur. The characters in these new movies aren't just archetypes, they're empty shells. So where does the franchise move from here? Well, the ending of the film, which is written with all the ethical complexity of an 8-year-old, sets up the next film in the series to be this sort of Planet of the Apes type franchise where now you have dinosaurs roaming in the wild, and that's going to be a problem for humanity. How do you exist? How do you coexist with this brand new species that is introduced not just to this isolated little island, but to the entire world? At least that sounds like a far more interesting premise than anything we've had with these two other Jurassic World films. The first one was just a rehash of Jurassic Park, but not as good. And Jurassic World 2 is this strange hybrid between The Lost World and something that Roger Corman would make, only it would be with far less means and far less talented actors, which would actually probably make it far more enjoyable. Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom is unfortunately not bad enough to be enjoyable. It's the worst kind of bad. It's the bad without any charm. It is the corporate bad, and maybe it'll set up a third film that could have a little glimpse of something interesting in there, although I have to admit I'm really not holding out any hope. And since I grew up on Jurassic Park as a child, and because it was an important film for me growing up, and now that I hate these new movies, The Last Jedi and Star Wars fans have taught me that it's okay to go and harass the director of the film on social media and to find the minorities and the people of color that act in these movies and racially abuse them so that they have to quit social media. So that's good to know.
Welcome to Jurassic Park.
So thank you very much for watching the video. As always, if you wouldn't mind hitting the like button and subscribing if you're not subscribed yet, it's always very much appreciated. And until next video, hopefully it's not 100 billion degrees. This is actually my second time recording the review because my camera actually overheated and shut down and I lost everything that I recorded previously, so hopefully this goes well. And until next time, see ya.
T-Rex is next and it's coming to get ya. Hands outstretched, steady and ready to molest ya. Ugly on the outside, worse within, with devious desires and a right pervy grin. Its mind's dirt, it flirts with skirt like dessert, or a young boy with the fun toy to hurt. But no matter how happy the horribly blue thought, it can't clap with joy.